August 13, 2018 is a date many of us associate with the case out of Frederick, Colorado of Sheehan and Chriswatts. This case is also the first time many of us have heard of a man known in Weld County, Colorado as DA Michael Rourke. While it may have been the national public's first glimpse into DA Rourke, it wasn't his first rodeo working on such a heinous and public case. Quite the contrary. So who exactly is he, and what shaped his present stance when filing charges in the Watts case? Michael J. Rourke was elected to the 19th Judicial District in Weld County, Colorado. Once appointed to the position back in 2015, following 7 years as the Assistant District Attorney. Since then, he has been reelected twice. The DA grew up in Colorado and attended college at the University of Colorado at Boulder and the University of Denver College of Law. Interesting fact, Rourke earned his JD the year following the JonBenet Ramsey murder case in Boulder. The crime against the young pageant queen took place in 1996, and he started his prosecution career in 1997. Prosecuting attorney Rourke didn't start in the 19th District. He moved there in 2005, but previously served the 18th District. I mentioned the JonBenet murder case because one can only imagine the emphasis on that case while it was happening. Personally, I was young, but I remember the news breaking as a child. Aside from Ted Bundy, stranger danger with my papa, the JonBenet case really caught my attention given my cousin was a local beauty queen and heavy in the pageant circuit. To think of being in law school during this high-profile case, there was much to learn regarding the media, grand juries, and of course the highly scrutinized work of law enforcement. The environmental climate was setting the stage for the future DA of Weld County long before he knew what awaited him. Young Michael Rourke was once given a book by one of his 9th grade teachers. She offered this book for him to read, per his words, to get his mind on something besides being a troublemaker. The author of the book, titled The Defense Never Rests, was written by a very well-known and highly respected defense attorney, F. Lee Bailey. He is better known as the master of the cross-examination. Many of you may recognize him from the O.J. Simpson trial, where he laid down the gauntlet of a cross against the detective Mark Fuhrman. This cross-examination obliterated Fuhrman as a witness for the prosecution and ultimately discredited the glove in one single cross. Let that one sit with you for a minute. Rourke notes that he was a sponge when it came to the book, and he really enjoyed the approach of taking a stance and advocating for a position. His role would later become the position for the advocacy of victims as a prosecuting attorney. This is the complete opposite of the famed American lawyer. Best believe he took notes. That appeal for advocacy has led to his successful and at times controversial career that has led him to Weld County. Let's not jump too far ahead. May 2006 would change the life of not only the victim but also the DA, unbeknownst to either of them as they started that day. What was every young college woman's worst nightmare came true for young Kimberly Corbin. I've covered some of this case in a previous video. However, something I choose to maintain on this channel is to respect the surviving victims. Kimberly has said in her TED Talk that she prefers to be the one to share her story. Her full TED Talk is linked below in the description, and I do recommend you go hear in her own words her recollection of how that day changed her life. Some similarities I have pointed out previously was the physical appearance of her attacker and the resemblance of Watts. I've yet to hear it mentioned, but it's my personal opinion she deserves all the credit for her strength. Something that stood out to me about Mrs. Rourke is that even at a young age, in college, she was able to somehow compose herself in that brutal moment and made a point that if her attacker thought he was leaving with a piece of her and she was going to be a silent victim, he picked the wrong woman. Kimberly, in the midst of her attack, made a point to preserve biological evidence and DNA that would nail the bastard who stole her security and so much more. Kimberly took a bold stance and became the key witness in her own trial, and guess who was sitting at the table alongside her? A young D.A. Rourke. Following the verdict, Kimberly made the brave decision to release her name to the public in hopes to encourage other victims to not be afraid to speak up and seek justice. It would be years, marriage, kids, and divorces before their paths came together in holy matrimony. It's important to note that D.A. Rourke is in public service, yes, but he too is a human being with human emotions. Please keep those things at the forefront of your mind as we continue. Fast forward to New Year's Eve in January 1st, 2012.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year.
Thomas and Ashley Fallis were finalizing plans for a New Year's Eve celebration with close friends and family at their Colorado home, kids included. The party didn't kick off as planned. Unexpectedly, Tom found his wife in their bathroom sobbing at the indication she was miscarrying yet again. The unexpected positive test results days prior came as a welcome surprise, given Ashley caved to her parents' insistence to have her tubes tied after their son was born. According to Tom, Ashley was devastated at the idea of a loss, so they took most of the day searching up surgical reversals and discussing the ideas of having more children in their future. By the time guests were set to arrive, Ashley was in better spirits, and the loving couple spent the night taking Jell-O shots and waiting on the ball to drop, surrounded by family and friends. Tom notes, as do others in attendance, that at one point Ashley wanted Tom to dance with her. He would not oblige without it being a special song. It had to be their song, by Blue October, and that was 18 Floor Balcony. I did give this song a listen, and it's a good one. The song played and the couple danced. Their last dance was marked by the music shared together of their first dance as husband and wife.
Dance. That dance was very memorable.
It was. That's something that stuck in my mind from that night. Because it started with his daughter playing songs and doing stuff like that, and then Tom said, this is our song, and it was a whole scene that I've never really seen before that, showed that there was a real love there, real caring, and it seemed like they were both really into one another.
And everyone was watching.
To my knowledge, it was, because they were in the living room. I remember I was sitting on the couch. I remember Stacy was right next to me. Don't recall where Alex was, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't far from it. But it seemed like that was the focus point at that moment.
And Ashley Fallis was on his feet, and he was holding her up on him.
Yes.
Moments later, the ball dropped and a family dispute ensued. The argument was over Ashley's family encouraging their daughter, who had stopped abruptly taking her psychiatric medications. She'd been drinking, depressed over a miscarriage, and they were trying to get her to go smoke some weed outside with them. Her husband became furious, and, honestly, who could blame him? Any caring husband would, especially knowing what they had been through earlier that day. So, harsh words were said, and as her family left for the night, Ashley went into the room, infuriated, of course, at her husband, shouting at him that she would, according to him, in quote, do whatever she wants to do. And he says in his interview, his last words to her were, do whatever the fuck you want to do. Just don't do whatever your family's telling you to do. She then chambered a bullet in the gun and shot herself. Tom jumps to hold her to stop the bleeding and calls 911. Once law enforcement and paramedics arrived, they performed what is known as the stop and go, where they got her loaded up in the ambulance and on her way to the hospital as quickly as possible. She was still alive when they left the home. Shirt saturated in his wife's blood, Tom was approached by authorities and immediately went to the police station to answer what was at first an interview turned interrogation. Meanwhile, his wife died alone at the hospital. His parents stayed at home with their kids. Tom was delivered this news while being hammered with questions about the incident moments earlier. This is where I want to highlight a difference between this case and Watts' case strictly related to the husbands. Psychologists and even law enforcement officers have stated that it's more likely that an innocent man will lose his cool when pressed for a crime he did not commit, as opposed to a man who knows he lost his temper and committed the crime in question. Following that train of thought, what do you consider between Watts and Fallis? Let's watch.
It's like people that, if people knew that we were having marital issues, they're going to look at me, especially with the way everything looks. And it honestly just makes me sick to my stomach because this is something that I would never do. Ever. I know, like, you have to look at every vantage point. This is something I would never do to my kids or my wife at all. I'm not sure, like, what I could do, like, to make people believe that, just because if they knew we were having marital discord, they would automatically look at me. But there's no, I would harm anybody.
My oldest daughter went to come back in. I was like, no, just leave. Just go call 911 and tell them to come here quick. And I said, open up the front door so they can get in. And last thing that I heard is that I heard my kids crying in the bedroom, and then I heard that she was still breathing, but they haven't told me anything since.
Let me tell you.
I didn't shoot my wife!
Tell me what happened then. Tell me what
I
happened.
just
Why do you
told
have
you.
those scratches on your body?
I just told
Why
you!
do you have... No, that is not from you doing
You know
that.
what? Yeah, it is. When you shave your chest, you sit there, and I do this all
No, you're
freaking
just trying
day.
to make more scratches right
Oh
now.
my
Let me
God! I told you. I've told her to her mom. Them. You don't need to get high. You don't need to go get high because your mom. You don't need to
So
listen to her anymore.
you were mad at the fact that she was listening to her mom.
I've already told you
Yes,
that.
and so when you went upstairs, you were arguing with her. And you know you were arguing with her. That wound on the back of her head isn't where she could do it herself, Tom. It is not.
Oh, bull.
Keep in mind, both cases, emotions should be running extremely high. Even if Watts believed that Shanann took off with the kids, or worse, that she did the unthinkable. Regardless, one would expect someone being drilled about all the things would eventually lose it. Depending on your personal thoughts with this, some may argue, well, there's his temper. Yet, if you carry that same train of thought across to the other case, then you would be stating that Watts were innocent. However, if we follow what the behavioral specialists have concluded, then it would be arguably evident that Fallis was innocent and Watts was attempting to suppress the truth, which we now know to be true. Wouldn't it royally piss you off if you're being grilled at the police station for something you know you did not do? Your spouse dies alone at the hospital. You know how much they were hurting, and you're never getting that time back with them. And worse, you have children whose entire world is now turned upside down. It's safe to say that the majority would be set off at some point. Not Watts. Fallis's explanation for the chest scratches are 100% accurate about hair regrowth in those hypersensitive areas. Don't believe me? Go shave your arms, go shave your chest, and it's summertime, so go shave that, bikini area, and then come back to me in about 48 to 72 hours and tell me what you're dealing with. There is even a text message that he shared with law enforcement between him and his wife where he tells her, hey, look, I shaved, and he even talks about how it's irritating him. Ultimately, the interrogation ended with Fallis leaving the station and returning home. At the memorial service, an emotional Fallis released his feelings in an unfiltered memorial message. Again, in my opinion, this is one of those moments where he's giving a message. He's overwhelmed with grief. This is someone who lost his wife, and it literally goes from thinking things are doing better, getting better. They have plans. They just shared a dance together, and then she's now taken her life and left him and the kids. And so he's emotionally just putting out there all his feelings. And some found it to be in poor taste or disrespectful. But at the same time, again, in my opinion, it's keeping those objective opinions open to understanding that someone who is grieving the loss of someone by means of suicide, that's an entirely different level of grief. So, one of which, this has been explained as raw grief at the harsh reality that was now his and their children's lives. Soon after her death, Ashley's death was ruled a suicide. The case doesn't end there, but it's a good place to shift over to the background and narrative of the Watts case. For those new to the Watts case, Chris and Shanann Watts lived in Frederick, Colorado with their 2 daughters. Their lives were chronicled on many Facebook Lives as Shanann worked for an MLM and he worked in the oil field for Anadarko Petroleum. The mainstream narrative is that Chris plotted and planned the murder of his pregnant wife and daughters in order to start over with a new flame of allegedly 6 weeks. It takes only about 10 minutes of reading the actual discovery to note that none of this aligns with either the multiple confessions or, more importantly, the evidence. Yet an initial confession, stacked sentences, plea deal, and shut-down investigation yielded a result that the husband, Chris, was charged and pled guilty to everything, regardless if it made evidentiary sense or not. Discovery was released after sentencing. That's a very brief overview, but we will discuss more along the way. A plea deal is an agreement between the prosecutor and the defendant, period. Chris signing a plea deal basically told his defense attorney to let it be. The plea deal is signed. Chris goes before a judge for sentencing. This judge then hears the unfiltered narrative and explanation only from the prosecutor's perspective and selective evidence coupled with the victim's impact statements. A simple yes or no nod from Chris is all that's heard to confirm the plea. No statement from him. Then the judge makes his statement about how horrendous the crime was with only partial truth. There is no disputing this. Rourke says himself they don't know why, which would be motive, or how these murders occurred at the time of sentencing, yet want a judge to sign off on multiple stacked and life sentences. Tammy and many other detectives shared their frustrations, stating they felt like they hit a wall because they had not even tipped the iceberg in their investigation before it was all halted. F. Lee Bailey notes that proper investigation is key to a defense. D.A. Rourke knows all too well that this is truth. Shut the investigation down quickly. Shut the defendant up quickly. They have one confession that he killed Shanann, and that's all that was needed to put him away. Full story need not be told or further investigated. Had this case been tried against a defense attorney such as Bailey, Kessinger would have been destroyed on cross. Every detail of Shanann's personal past would have been brought up and tried. The text messages between friends would have been admissible for state of mind. In this case, could have been a repeat. What we can learn from the Fallis case as it relates to Watts is that everything the DA chose to do in the Fallis case, he refused and still to this day refuses to do in the Watts case. It's up to you and the public to ask the question why. I think we have to look at the Fallis case to really understand why Watts' case was approached in such a swift manner. One family pushes and the other goes quietly. A significant difference between the two cases is how the victims were both portrayed as well as characterized. Ashley Fallis' health issues were openly available for discussion. She was known to have been suffering with depression and anxiety as well as bipolar disorder. Her parents and husband attest to the fact that she stopped taking her medication when she thought she was pregnant. They also acknowledged that she was drinking the night in question and that her parents invited her to partake in marijuana outside her home on that New Year's Eve. No one tried to bury or squash these truths. On the other hand, Shanann has been described several times, or she described herself several times, very publicly about her quote-unquote health challenges. Yet her family and the DA appear to 100% turn a blind eye to any and all indications that Shanann ever suffered from depression, anxiety, or potentially bipolar as well. Any and all medical records have been sealed, so much so that the autopsy report does not show any indication that she suffered with lupus for years. No indication of chronic illnesses. Even the blood alcohol level noted in the toxicology report was squashed by the DA in a press conference, highlighting that Chris was at fault, and that's basically all anyone needed to know and accept. Never mind the climate, the dirt, and environment in which she was actually buried. I've researched this several times. At the end of the day, her body was not found in a hostile environment, considering other cases. The error should have been noted as the location of the spleen blood being used instead of using it from the eye to test these levels. This was an error by the medical examiner, which would make for a hellacious cross at trial. Again, address it quickly, tell the public to look away, and expect no questions. Squash it. Fallis's letters to her family, speaking about hurting too much to go on and where she mentions committing the unthinkable self-harm, explain at length how she's tired of fighting the mental demons that she continued to battle. Shanann's text to friends stating she doesn't, in quote, want this baby, I can't do it with 3 alone, and asking Chris if he wanted an abortion, were buried in the discovery with hopes that everyone would gloss over the 2,000-plus page original document and look past the actual evidence available. Both cases demonstrate an affair and the chance of an affair from the spouse. In the Fallis case, Ashley was the one who had the affair. She and Tom spent time working through things and were in what everyone knew them considered to be like an upswing in their relationship. She called off the affair, and it really didn't play an integral part in the trial, with the exception of this person testifying to her mental health at the time of the affair and how it ended. In the Watts case, it's almost forbidden in the metaverse to even remotely imply that Shanann possibly could have been having an affair, as we very well know that Chris was having one with Kessinger. Even her brother makes mention of this in his immediate interview with law enforcement. Regardless if she did or did not, it's obvious that it's no excuse for what ultimately took place. But why hide and cover it? In the Watts case, it was more important to blast Chris and Kessinger for their affair than to ever consider that the affair may not in fact have played a role in the deaths of the family at all. If the affair isn't the motive, then what is? A random fact. Tom was also employed by Weld County Sheriff's Office, and Ashley had only recently found work after a year of unemployment at Northern Colorado Rehabilitation Hospital. Shanann worked at a call center at a Colorado Children's Hospital, and Chris Watts worked at another major employer in the area, Anadarko Petroleum. So both cases typically had one spouse in healthcare of some sort, and then the other was employed by a major employer. I mean, you either worked in law enforcement or the oil field. In the Fallis case, once it was ruled a suicide, life moved on for a couple of years until an email arrived, according to Lindsay B. King of 5280.com. The email was from Weld County Assistant District Attorney Michael Rourke, sent on May 30th, 2013, and was clear. He wanted Evans Police Department Chief of Police Rick Brandt, Sergeant Jason Phipps, and Commander Patrick Hawes to know he'd spoken with the Attorney General's office about Ashley Fallis's parents' continued efforts to prove their son-in-law had murdered their daughter, even though the case had been closed in March 2012 as a suicide. He also wanted law enforcement colleagues to know he had delivered an explicit message to the Attorney General's office. In quote, I explained that from my perspective, this investigation was done properly by Evans, CBI, and the Northern Regional Crime Lab. I also explained that no one believed there was even a probable cause for a crime, much less proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Ashley Fallis's parents were pissed and livid. They pushed to have the case reopened and reevaluated. No one would listen. The DA never petitioned for it. No one in law enforcement petitioned for it. Everyone in law enforcement remained of the thought that it was a suicide. It wasn't until her family went to the media and the media started hammering into the DA's office, demanding that there was sufficient evidence, new sufficient evidence to reopen the case, Some secondary eyewitness statements came into play, and the case was ultimately reopened against all legal advice, and it went before a grand jury. Now, a lot of times people hear indictments, and if someone's indicted, then they just go ahead and assume that they're guilty, and then you just watch the trial. And that's really not how it's intended to be. So a grand jury is a jury of your peers. The prosecution's arguments are the only ones heard behind closed doors, filtered to their liking, and what's admissible in a grand jury trial is not the same as what's admissible at a criminal trial. A grand jury that indicts you is also not the same jury that will sit the trial and convict. So the grand jury hears the narrative of what the prosecution believes happened, or the narrative that they believe happened. If they find probable cause to indict a person based on what they are told, then they move to indict, and then that person goes to trial. When you go to a jury trial, that same jury, again, is not going to hear the same evidence. So it's going to be a different jury and a different set of rules for the evidence that's allowed in. So now the state has the burden of proof, and the evidence is screened for admissibility, and what was allowed into the grand jury case, again, is not what's going to be allowed in the criminal trial. This is how you can have an indictment of an innocent person and have an innocent person on trial. Just because someone is indicted does not automatically mean that the state's proven their case and they're guilty, period. This is crucial to upholding our judicial system. You are innocent until proven guilty, and there are standards by which evidence is collected, processed, etc. What came into play? Ashley Fallis' mental health and letters she wrote to Tom. Ashley's medical provider, family history testimony. You can compare this form of evidence to that of Shanann's text messages. I know no one really wants to look at that angle or look at Shanann in this light, but the truth is, I believe this is the type of evidence that the DA was trying to avoid displaying again at a trial, because he knew how just strenuous and difficult this could be for the family. Because the Fallis case wasn't tried for years. The family had endured years of this hurt and heartache. Then they go to trial, try the man for murder, and the verdict comes back only to solidify the original ultimate verdict that Tom Fallis was indeed innocent and the state had not proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Ashley's death still remains a suicide. Thomas Fallis is declared innocent and now continues to raise their children in Indiana. All these years, all this money investigating the case, then take it to trial and get the full story. It didn't add up to what the narrative was trying to relay. The facts did not fit the narrative. The jury shared some final thoughts.
The thing that they did was dance together. Both of them were just fine. And so it was a matter of an hour where everything had to change.
So you as a juror had to determine what happened in that hour.
His testimony was not a bombshell like we had expected it to be.
But I heard him saying, "Oh my God, what have I done? Oh my God, what have I done?" And he proceeded to say, "I shot my wife."
We expected this big thing to drop, this new evidence, this something that we could hold on to really put this case to rest, and it just did not happen.
Do you believe that Nick Glover heard Tom Fallis say, "I shot her"?
I believe he heard something. That's what I believe. He was a 15-year-old kid, window was cracked open less than 3 inches.
I almost believe that he heard the uncle yelling that and got that confused. I think that Ashley Fallis, again, was in the midst of that perfect storm, couldn't handle it, and just said, "Heck with it, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I want to do." And
Which was?
take her own life.
I don't believe it was premeditated. I think it was probably a spur of the moment kind of thing.
I think it was a desperate moment.
It was a desperate moment.
I had Tom's life in my hand. I had the children's lives in my hand. Whatever decision I made was going to directly impact those kids as well.
11-1. What was the second vote?
Right.
All of it was not
12-0.
guilty. 12-0. The letters that she had written were a big part of it.
Tom loved Ashley, but Ashley didn't love Ashley. That's the way I interpreted them. I do feel saddened for Ashley's family, just because I know that they're not going to get the justice that they think that Ashley needed.
Do the two of you believe you made the right decision on this? You reached the right verdict?
Yes, I do.
I do. Deep in my guts, I do.
While we may never truly know what went on in that conversation DA Rourke had with Shanann's family, I do believe it is with his whole heart that he did not dare drag Shanann's family through the hellacious ordeal that he only recently witnessed in the courtroom with the Fallis case. Right or wrong, Chris was going away for admitting to killing Shanann. It was take that and let him rot in prison, or chance, yet again, a trial that, in my opinion, an amateur defense attorney could have won. Rourke knew Shanann's past, all of her messages, friends, co-workers, mental health, parenting, and character would have been annihilated on the stand. He knew what the statistics show regarding smothering deaths of children and the burden that would bear, especially when it came to proof. His own words would be used against him in court. He clearly states that Shanann had fingernail marks on the right side of her neck, which would indicate the person strangling her would be left-handed. Chris is right-handed. Kessinger is left. Again, go back to the lawyer that the DA really admired, the master cross-examiner. Could DA Rourke take the Watts case to trial and win against a beast of an attorney like that of F. Lee Bailey? A grand jury indictment would not be difficult, but the evidence allowed or not allowed into the criminal trial would paint a very different picture. It's my opinion that by studying this lawyer's approach, one can learn when and how to hold, fold, and walk away. F. Lee Bailey was one of a kind, but don't fool yourself into thinking other defense attorneys have not studied his ways either. This man, with all the evidence against O.J. Simpson, annihilated the testimony of a seasoned detective in a highly publicized case and shifted the momentum that ultimately led to a not guilty verdict. He led the Boston Stranglers' mental health defense and successfully overturned Sam Shepard's case on a constitutional argument. F. Lee Bailey makes it abundantly clear that a real investigation is the key to establishing a solid defense strategy. The counter to that is to shut it all down. Stop everything. Plea deal signed. The legend D.A. Rourke studied as a child would have, in my opinion, walked Chris Watts out the front door.